Welcome to Life Stories, where every tale teaches us something profound about life, love, and the lessons we learn along the way. Today, we bring you the story of Sophie Thompson, a woman whose quiet strength and dedication to helping others were overshadowed by a harsh judgment based on appearance. In a luxury car dealership, Sophie faced discrimination that would change the lives of those involved forever. How does a simple act of judgment lead to an eye-opening transformation? Stay tuned to find out. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and begin this story with us today. It was a crisp morning in early spring when Sophie walked into Eastwood Luxury Motors, a dealership renowned for its extravagant collection of exotic cars. She wore a simple white t-shirt and faded jeans, a stark contrast to the polished showrooms and gleaming vehicles that surrounded her. The air was filled with the scent of leather and polished chrome. And yet Sophie felt strangely at ease. She wasn't there to flaunt her wealth or show off. She simply wanted to find the perfect car for her sister's milestone birthday, something elegant, something meaningful, something her sister would cherish forever. As she stepped inside, the salesman glanced up, their eyes scanning her appearance with a judgment that was impossible to miss. Sophie felt a twinge of discomfort, but she shrugged it off. She knew the world often made assumptions about people based on how they looked. But that had never defined her. She didn't care about appearances. But she did care about the people she loved. And today, she was here for her sister. The sales manager, Ryan Matthews, was the first to approach. He wore a smile that was as practiced as it was cold. His tie perfectly knotted, his suit tailored to perfection. He looked Sophie up and down, his gaze lingering a little too long on her sneakers, before his lips parted to speak. "I'm sorry," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "but I think you're in the wrong place." He gestured toward the exit with a flourish. "These vehicles start at $300. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in our used car division." Sophie's face flushed with embarrassment, but she remained composed. Her eyes flitted to the other salesmen, who snickered under their breath, their amusement barely concealed. It was as if she wasn't even a person, just an inconvenience. A dreamer who had wandered into their world of luxury. Without uttering a word, Sophie turned and walked out of the showroom, her heart sinking with humiliation. The sting of judgment lingered. But Sophie was no stranger to the world's narrow definitions of worth. She had learned long ago that people often measured value in the most superficial ways, by appearance, by wealth, by status. It was a lesson that had been taught to her more times than she cared to remember. But it still hurt, every single time. The next morning, a Rolls-Royce Phantom glided to a stop outside the dealership. The sunlight caught its sleek body, casting shimmering reflections across the gleaming showroom. As the car came to a halt, a uniformed chauffeur stepped out, opening the rear passenger door with the precision of a well-trained servant. A tall man emerged, his presence commanding, his posture confident. He was impeccably dressed, his suit tailored to perfection, his salt and pepper hair neatly groomed. He exuded the kind of quiet authority that money could buy, and yet he did not flaunt it. He moved with a calm assurance that came from knowing exactly who he was and where he stood in the world. The salesmen gathered around him, eager to make their mark. But it was Ryan who rushed forward, eager to claim this prestigious client. As the man stepped into the showroom, Ryan greeted him with a practiced smile. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to Eastwood Luxury Motors. How may I assist you today?" The man returned Ryan's smile. But it was clear that he wasn't there for small talk. He cut straight to the point. "I'm here about a specific vehicle," he said, his voice smooth and confident. "The Azure Coupe, midnight blue." Ryan's face brightened. "Ah, excellent choice, sir. One of only 15 produced this year. It's right over here," he said, leading the man to the coveted car. But as they walked, Ryan's gaze fell upon the woman who had entered the dealership just the day before, the woman who had been dismissed so callously. It was Sophie, standing in the same spot where she had been so unceremoniously rejected. She had returned, not to make a scene, but to quietly remind herself that the world did not define her worth. No matter how others tried to. Ryan froze for a moment, his smile faltering as he recognized her. He turned back to the man who had just entered. "Please excuse me," he muttered, his professional demeanor cracking. "I'll take care of this." Sophie stood quietly at the edge of the showroom, her face calm, her heart heavy. She had come back not for revenge, but for clarity. She knew she would not be treated fairly here. Not by Ryan, not by any of them. But there was something in her that demanded she stand tall, even in the face of such prejudice. It wasn't about proving a point or seeking retribution. It was about her own integrity, about the quiet strength she had cultivated over the years. As Ryan led his new client toward the Azure, Sophie took a deep breath. Today, she was going to make sure they knew who she was. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. The following day, the events at Eastwood Luxury Motors still weighed heavily on Sophie. As she drove back from the dealership, the feeling of humiliation lingered. But she tried not to let it consume her. The world often misunderstood her choices, but she was at peace with them. She valued simplicity over extravagance, something that had always set her apart from others. However, it was one thing to make those choices by her own volition, and another to be judged for them by others. Sophie's life had never been about appearances. She had built her success with hard work, perseverance, and a deep sense of purpose. Few knew the real story behind her humble attire, her modest lifestyle. Beneath the unassuming exterior, Sophie was a force to be reckoned with, a woman whose actions spoke louder than any designer brand or expensive car. She was the founder of the Thompson Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to improving the lives of children with disabilities. Over the years, Sophie had raised millions of dollars to provide specialized medical equipment, therapy, and educational programs for those who needed it most. But despite her success, she had always remained grounded. Her fortune wasn't measured in luxury cars or exclusive homes. It was measured in lives changed, in opportunities given to those who had none. When Sophie founded the Thompson Foundation, she did so with the belief that every child deserved a chance to thrive, regardless of their background or challenges. She had poured her heart and soul into the foundation, spending countless hours working with the families and children it served. It had become her life's work, her passion, and that passion was what had driven her to succeed. Not the desire for recognition or material gain. But none of this mattered to the sales manager at Eastwood Luxury Motors. Ryan Matthews, with his well-tailored suit and practiced smile, couldn't have cared less about the real Sophie. To him, she was just another person who didn't fit the mold of the right customer. His judgment wasn't about who she was or what she had achieved. It was about how she looked, how she presented herself in a world that prized appearance above all else. Sophie had seen this kind of treatment before. People who assumed they could define her worth based on the clothes she wore or the car she drove. It wasn't new, but it still stung every time. As she reflected on her encounter at the dealership, Sophie's anger wasn't just about how she had been treated. It was about the countless others who faced the same kind of judgment every day. How many people, she wondered, had been denied opportunities simply because of their appearance? How many people had been made to feel less than humans simply because they didn't meet the superficial standards of a society that placed so much importance on wealth, status, and outward appearances? But Sophie wasn't going to let that happen today. She wouldn't be defined by someone else's narrow view of what was important. She wasn't going to let Ryan Matthews, or anyone else for that matter, dictate her value. As she sat in the quiet of her office at the Thompson Foundation, Sophie made a decision. She wasn't going to let this go. She wasn't going to let the ignorance and prejudice of one man, or a whole dealership, define how she saw herself, or how the world should see people like her. She was going to make them understand. It wasn't about revenge, it was about raising awareness. It was about showing the world that worth wasn't determined by appearances, but by the heart and soul of a person. The following morning, Sophie's husband, Nathaniel, found her in the office, a look of determination in her eyes. She hadn't spoken much about the incident, but Nathaniel knew her well enough to see that something was brewing. He gave her a quiet smile and asked, "What's on your mind, Soph?" Sophie looked up from her desk. A small, resolute smile forming. "It's time for a lesson," she said, "and I think I know how we can deliver it." Nathaniel sat across from Sophie, taking in her calm yet intense expression. He knew her well enough to recognize when she was determined to take action. They had been together long enough for him to understand that Sophie didn't act out of petty vengeance. If she was going to do something, it was because she believed it was the right thing to do. And this time, her resolve was unwavering. "Sophie, you know I support you in everything," Nathaniel began, his voice gentle. "But what exactly are you planning? You're not thinking of making some grand spectacle, are you?" Sophie leaned back in her chair, her gaze steady and focused. "No, nothing dramatic. I don't need to make a scene. But I want to teach them something they'll never forget. And I think the best way to do that is to make them see who I am. Not just the woman they judged by her clothes, but the woman behind the work. The woman who's been changing lives for years without asking for anything in return." Nathaniel nodded slowly, understanding her vision. He knew how deeply Sophie cared about those who were overlooked and underestimated. She had built the Thompson Foundation from the ground up, creating opportunities for children with disabilities who had been forgotten by the rest of the world. But this was different. This wasn't just about charity, it was about dignity, respect, and the refusal to accept the unfairness of a world that judged based on appearances. The following morning, Nathaniel made a few discreet phone calls. He had a plan in mind, one that would send a powerful message to Eastwood Luxury Motors. He wasn't one for grand gestures, but he knew how to make a statement. By the end of the day, everything would be set in motion. As the morning passed, Ryan Matthews arrived at the dealership as usual, his confident stride echoing in the empty showroom. He straightened his tie, his thoughts preoccupied with the day ahead. He had shared the previous day's incident with his colleagues, laughing off the delusional dreamer who had wandered into the dealership. To him, it had been a minor inconvenience, something that had barely registered on his radar. But today would bring a reality he wasn't prepared for. At precisely 10:17 a.m., the hum of a luxury engine interrupted the quiet of the showroom. Conversations halted mid-sentence as the unmistakable sound of a Rolls-Royce Phantom glided to a stop in front of the dealership's grand entrance. The car was a sight to behold, with its gleaming, custom midnight blue finish that seemed to shimmer under the sunlight. As the car came to a stop, a uniformed chauffeur stepped out, opening the rear passenger door with perfect precision. Out stepped a man, tall and commanding in his appearance. His tailored suit, understated but undeniably expensive, seemed to speak volumes about his wealth and influence. His salt and pepper hair was immaculately groomed, and his posture exuded an effortless authority that only came from years of success. It was clear from the way he carried himself that this was no ordinary client. This was someone who didn't need to flaunt his status to be noticed. Ryan's heart skipped a beat as he watched the man approach the showroom. He was immediately on alert, his professional instincts kicking in. This was the type of client every salesman dreamed of, a potential high-profile buyer who could make a significant impact on the dealership's sales. "Good morning, sir," Ryan called out, his voice smooth and practiced. "Welcome to Eastwood Luxury Motors. How may I assist you today?" The man returned Ryan's greeting with a polite smile, but his expression remained cool and measured. "I'm here to inquire about a specific vehicle," he said, his voice calm and unwavering. "The Azure Coupe, midnight blue." Ryan's eyes widened, his earlier smugness slipping away as he recognized the car the man was referring to. This was the same limited edition model that had been the subject of Sophie's visit the day before, the car she had been so interested in, yet had been dismissed because of her casual attire. The realization hit Ryan like a ton of bricks. "Ah, excellent choice, sir," Ryan said, his voice suddenly more eager. "One of only 15 produced this year. I'd be happy to show you to the car. But as Ryan moved to lead the man toward the azure coupe, something unexpected happened. The man spoke again, his voice calm but with an edge that made Ryan's stomach drop. "My wife was here yesterday," the man said, his gaze narrowing slightly. "She expressed interest in this model. Her name is Sophie Thompson." Ryan froze. The name was familiar, but it took a moment for him to place it. And when he did, his face drained of color. Sophie Thompson, the woman he had so casually dismissed the day before, the woman he had judged based on her modest appearance, was the wife of this man, the man standing before him now. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," Ryan stammered, trying to regain his composure. "I wasn't aware of the details. Perhaps one of my colleagues assisted her." "No," the man interrupted, his tone growing colder. "It was you, Ryan. You treated my wife with disrespect based solely on her attire. She was dressed simply, yes, but that doesn't mean she didn't deserve the same respect as anyone else who walks through these doors." Ryan's professional mask cracked, and he could feel the eyes of the other salespeople and customers on him. The room had gone completely silent. The weight of his actions hung heavy in the air, and he couldn't escape the truth that had just been laid bare before him. Sophie had returned not for retribution, but for awareness, to make Ryan see that worth isn't defined by how someone dresses or the car they drive. It's defined by who they are, by the values they carry, and by the way they treat others. And in this moment, Ryan was being forced to confront everything he had overlooked. As the situation unfolded in the showroom, Ryan Matthews stood still, his mind racing with the realization of the consequences of his actions. He had treated Sophie with disdain, dismissing her based on her simple appearance, not knowing who she really was. Now, the truth was staring him in the face, and it was impossible to ignore. The man standing before him wasn't just a wealthy client, he was the husband of the woman he had wrongly judged. Sophie Thompson wasn't just a dreamer, as Ryan had assumed. She was a philanthropist, a woman who had devoted her life to helping others. And her husband, Nathaniel, was a man of influence and power in his own right. As the conversation continued, Ryan felt a deep sense of regret. His actions had not only offended Sophie but also tarnished the reputation of the dealership. And worse, they had revealed a side of him that he hadn't known existed, one that made judgments based on appearances rather than character. Sophie, however, didn't take pleasure in his discomfort. She had never wanted vengeance, she wanted awareness. She wanted people to realize that true value isn't found in the clothes we wear or the cars we drive, but in the kindness and respect we show to others, regardless of their background or appearance. By the end of the conversation, Ryan understood the lessons that Sophie had quietly imparted. He agreed to change, not just for the sake of his career, but for the sake of becoming a better person. Sophie and Nathaniel left the dealership that day with their heads held high, knowing they had done more than just buy a car, they had taught a valuable lesson. And for Ryan, it was a lesson that would stay with him forever. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales from life stories.